I just want to thank everyone for being here, for joining us tonight for the first of 2 voter literacy sessions presented by the USC Athletics Black Lives Matter Action Team. As a part of our efforts to bring educational content to the athletic department, we will be conducting monthly educational sessions related to matters focused on civic engagement and social justice issues. I want to thank our AD, Mike Bone, both our steering and advisory committee members for their continued support in our efforts. And I'd like to also thank the Center for Political Future and Vote SC for partnering with us and bringing content to this session, as well as helping to register so many voters. Voting is one of the most sacred rights of a citizen in a democracy. We want to make sure that we do our part to ensure that this right is available to as many voters as possible. Hence, USC is making the Galen Center available to our university and surrounding communities as a voting site, and we hope the voter literacy sessions provide useful information to make your voting experience successful and easy. Bringing experts to our sessions is important, and I'm happy to say that we have one of the best here tonight, Jeff Klein. Jeff is the manager of Civic Engagement, Community Relations, and Legislation, LA County Registrar Recorder, and County Clerk, the department that manages the single largest electorate in the United States. He has almost 25 years of experience in elections, 8 years working on a partisan level, and 15 years working in a nonpartisan administrative capacity. In addition to community engagement, his tenure at the Registrar Recorder County Clerk includes extensive experience in election worker training and election day operations. Klein holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Cal State University Northridge and a master's degree in public administration and policy from Cal State University Long Beach. He has been twice elected to the Elysian Valley Neighborhood Council and remains active not just on a professional level, but also at a personal level in communities throughout the region. Again, we are so excited and honored to have Jeff come to us and bring his expertise. And so Jeff, welcome.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm equally excited that we're able to partner, especially with the Galen Center as a vote center. And so we're very excited about that. A lot of really exciting voting locations, and that is one of them for this upcoming election. But I'm gonna go ahead and talk a bit about everything you'll need to know about voting. So I'm gonna bring in my PowerPoint here. I have to admit, this is the first time I've actually done a presentation where we have trivia mixed in, so that's pretty.
Oh, wow, okay.
Okay, all right, great. So, so this election is a very unique election. Hopefully the only time this will be this unique in the history of our elections, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, as everyone is aware, the COVID-19 pandemic, but we still have an election to run. So how we navigate and offer voters opportunities to vote is very important, and we want to make sure that people have as many opportunities to vote as we can provide. So again, I am Jeff Klein. I oversee all of our civic engagement, our community relations and legislation section for the registrar, and we cover the entire county, all the way up to Lancaster, down to Long Beach, out to Malibu, out to Pomona. So we cover a very large area. And so on that note, let's do our first question to just get everyone warmed up here. How many cities are in the county of Los Angeles?
Throw out a number, go for it.
Is it 132?
Oof.
Not quite that high.
82.
That's pretty close. Who said 82?
That was my second guess.
Oh, okay. Right, well, we'll go with that. So there's actually 88 cities in Los Angeles County. Most people don't realize that. They always just hear Los Angeles and assume it's the city of Los Angeles, but there's actually 88 cities in the county. Los Angeles and Long Beach are 2 of the largest. We have some very small cities. You might have heard of a city called Vernon, which has only maybe 1,000 people. There's also a city called Bradbury, which I had never heard of until I started working here. So there's some really small cities. We have some cities that are almost entirely gated cities, and so forth. So top picture is Los Angeles. That probably looks familiar. And then the bottom is Long Beach. And we are the most diverse county in the nation. So one thing that I always like to talk about when we talk about voting, and a lot of people think of voting as, oh, you choose someone, a candidate, and that's, you're picking based on candidates. And it's true, you do vote for candidates, but actually what you're really voting for are issues that candidates connect with. All candidates embody a set of issues. So whether you're voting for, president or you're voting for mayor, those individuals embody a set of candidates. And when we vote, you may not realize it, but you're actually looking for a set of values or a set of issues that best align with your own values or issues. So because we're such a diverse county, as we just said, there's 88 cities in LA County, maybe let's throw out some ideas or some thoughts on what are some issues of concern in your community, and maybe not even in LA County. Maybe it's if you grew up in a different part of the country, maybe there's issues that you're concerned with. So let's throw out some issues going on that you're concerned with.
Homelessness.
Homelessness. Okay, great. That's a huge issue right now.
I'd say gentrification.
Gentrification. Okay, great. Big issue.
Issues surrounding COVID-19.
COVID-19. There we go.
Rent, paying rent with the economy now.
Rent, evictions, right? Evictions, rent, the economy. Those are all great issues. Those are all different issues too. They're related. A lot of issues are related to each other. So a lot of issues, and I think we kind of get the point. So the next slide I'm going to show is how these issues break down for different levels of government. So when we hear about elections, we hear Trump and Biden, right? That's the big focus right now, or Congress. And those are federal level offices. But if you actually look to the left of this slide, a lot of these issues that impact our daily lives actually are decided at the local level. So we talked about gentrification, evictions, right? No issue is more important to someone than whether or not they're going to be able to have a place to live in a month, right? So evictions, rent control, things like that. Those are local issues. Homelessness, that's a local issue, right? Most of those, while the states and the federal government address those issues because they provide assistance or policies that help local governments, most of those decisions are decided at the local level. I'm part of our homeless initiative for LA County. One thing that the registrar's office does is provide elections. So obviously registering people to vote, and if you're homeless, you're still able to register to vote. But also as the recorder and county clerk, we provide birth certificates. If you need to get access to services, you need to get your birth certificate. And so if you are homeless, that's a lot more challenging to get your birth certificate than maybe someone else. So we do a lot of outreach around that, making sure people can get their vital records. So most of these issues that affect us on a daily basis are decided at the local level. Recycling programs, while, we think of it pretty, at least where I live in LA City, and we have a recycling program. I go and I take my recycling out once a week, and no big deal. But in some cities, when there's conflicts with, the vendors that pick up the trash, sometimes the trash piles up. So those are things we are not really accustomed to, but in some cities, those are real big issues. Street repairs, if you're driving down the street, hitting potholes, utilities, tree trimming, those things are all something that we just kind of take for granted, but poor tree trimming policy, poor utility pole policy can lead to fires and other natural disasters. So these are things that are really all decided at the local level, not to get too far into the weeds. At the state level, we have issues around higher education and state services like the DMV. And so we do renew our license once a year or every so many years whenever it's required. There's also state programs, the welfare programs, things like that. And then at the federal level, you have Homeland Security, immigration, foreign policy. We talked about trade relations. That's something that's usually a federal level issue. Sometimes states get involved. And so it's not to say that things like Homeland Security aren't important. Of course, Homeland Security is a very important issue. And of course, immigration policy is very important. And depending on maybe your family background or if you have family members going through that immigration process, or maybe you personally have gone through that, some of these issues are heightened more than others. But generally speaking, what impacts our lives on a daily basis is really decided more at the local level, sometimes at the state level, and occasionally at the federal level. But what we hear a lot these days is talking about the presidential election because that's what gets the most eyeballs, right? People pay attention because it's a big race. People don't pay attention to mayor and city council. So, you know, if you hadn't really thought about it, don't worry, you're not different than most people. So as the registrar's office, we try to really create awareness around all candidates and all issues. And when you vote for someone or you're trying to decide how you want to vote, it's best to think of things in terms of issues, not in terms of candidates. The people running embody these sets of issues. How are they going to address these different issues we see on the screen, or some of the ones that we talked about, homelessness, gentrification, and things like that. So this is to really just kind of, I wanted to start with this to kind of get everyone thinking about voting and how our vote impacts, you know, the impact of our vote essentially is what this presentation is taken from. We call it the impact of your vote. All right, so let's move on. So as I mentioned, LA County is a very large county. It's the most diverse county in the country. We have 5.5 million voters in LA County. We actually have more voters in LA County than 43 states have statewide. So it's a really huge county. We still have about 500,000 to 600,000 people who are eligible, but are not registered to vote. So there are still some people who haven't voted. But you'll notice we never get 5.5 million votes, right? We always get substantially lower, and that's because we don't, you know, the bigger issue is getting people to turn out. And so we're always trying to encourage people to turn out and stress the importance of not just voting in the big elections, but voting in all elections. And then, you know, when you vote, you don't have to vote for everything on the ballot. You can go and you can pick out the few contests that you're interested in, and you can skip the others. I think some people think, oh, if I vote, I have to know the answers to everything on the ballot. It's not a test. You find what's interesting to you. You vote for that. If all you want to do is vote for president, and that's all you want to cast your ballot for, that's what you can do. If you don't want to vote for president, you want to vote for all the other contests, you can do that as well. Okay, so the first step is voting. That's the number one thing, is that if you want to be part of the process and you want to have your voice heard and you want to make your voice heard similarly to other people who believe the same about issues that you like or you don't like, you need to register to vote to be part of that. So I want to ask another trivia question. So 100 years ago, the Constitution was changed and it granted who the right to vote? And when we changed the Constitution, it's called an amendment. So does anyone know what that amendment is? Might have heard a lot of talk about it this year.
Was it women for the 19th Amendment?
Absolutely. Fantastic answer. I don't know who got that, but good job. So in 1920, the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution. We call it was ratified, and it gave the women the right to vote. And that's called the suffrage movement, is what it was called. And it was a pretty, you know, we hear a lot about, there's a lot of parallels to different civil rights movements. And I think when we look back in history, we think these were singular moments, but these were struggles that had been going on for years and years and years, very similar to struggles we're seeing today that are carrying over for years and years and years. And so movements take a while, and they were successful in getting the 19th Amendment added to the Constitution. Okay, so one thing you'll always hear, and it's not just our office, it's a general sort of approach that most elections officials and people who are connected to elections on sort of an administrative level, they talk about making a plan. So what is that plan? First, you want to check your registration status. And this is not just the first time. Always good habit to check your registration status, because when you move, you have to update your registration. And maybe you forgot to do that. You didn't think about that. I know moving is a stressful experience. So some people forget that they also have to update their voter registration. Also need to be aware that you'll receive your sample ballot before each election. Today is actually the day where we're starting to send out sample ballots. So over the next week or two, you'll start seeing those. I'm not sure if you've ever mailed 5.5 million pieces of mail, but it takes a little while for those to go out get out to the county. So you may not get it on Monday, but you might start seeing it in the mail over the next week or two. And what the sample ballot is a list of who you're eligible to vote for. So depending on where you live, you're eligible to vote for those individuals. You then will receive your vote by mail ballot. On October 5th, we'll start sending those out. And then you just decide how do you want to return your vote by mail ballot. Do you want to send it back by mail? It's postage paid. We have vote by mail drop boxes, or you could walk it into an in-person vote center like the Galen Center and drop it off at a ballot box at an in-person location. So if you want to hold on to it until October 30th when the Galen Center first opens, you can go ahead and do that. Also, just let people know you got to be registered by October 19th to be able to vote in this election. There's actually one other opportunity to vote if you missed the deadline. I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So it's good information to have, especially if you have friends who maybe missed the deadline. Okay, the next step is voting. And I have a trivia question. All right, so let's see if anyone knows how sharp people are. In which types of elections are you only able to vote for candidates from the party that you are registered with?
Is it the primaries?
Yep, the primary. Good job, Jason. All right. So in the presidential, and so one thing to note, at least in California, and it's different for different states, but for California, it actually really only matters for president and something called county central committee, which is something that political parties use. It's a kind of a more obscure contest. So president is sort of the main focus. Every other contest, Congress, mayor, state assembly, any other contest, you're actually able to vote for anybody that's on the ballot. But for president specifically, you're only allowed to vote for the candidate from that party that you are registered for. So in California, we have these official parties. We have Democrat, Republican, Green, Libertarian, Peace and Freedom, and something called American Independent Party. So those are the bottom four are what we would consider third parties. Okay, so next step, after you vote, you have to stay engaged. So one thing we like to stress is voting doesn't, your civic responsibility doesn't end at voting. If you truly want to be engaged, you have to follow along. Did the person you voted for, did they do what they said they were going to do? We have the power to vote for someone else. I think a lot of people just shrug and throw their hands up in the air and assume, I voted for that person, but they didn't uphold their, what they were going to do. Nothing we can do about it. That's not true. There's a lot you can do about it. You can vote for someone else in the next election. Also, you can volunteer to register people to vote. There's a lot of organizations doing it, or you can go, put up a table on the corner and register people to vote, carry them around your campus, register people at school, lots of opportunities to do that. There's also a lot of organizations that do voter registration, and so you can always link up with those organizations and volunteer for them. You can also attend a council meeting or a school board meeting. Any public entity that meets, their meetings have to be open to the public. I'm always surprised by how many people don't realize that actually you can go and you can speak at a council meeting. You can speak at a school board meeting. You can also serve as an election worker if you would like to serve for this election. You could sign up. There's a link on our website, and I know we're coordinating with the Galen Center to make sure we can get people signed up. And then you can even reach out and contact your local representative. And if you think they don't read your emails or your letters, it's not true. I have a number of friends who actually worked for elected officials, and their job was actually reading all the mail. So they may not come across, the elected official may not necessarily see your letter, but someone in the office will read that letter. And with emails, one of my main roles here at the registrar's office is to communicate with board offices. I get emails from random constituents all the time from board offices that say, can you give me an answer on this? Can you give me an answer on that? So they really do get your emails and your letters, and they'll read it, and they'll probably reach out to you. So keep that in mind. It's a way that you can be engaged. And it's, I know the cynical thing is to say no one cares, but that's actually, there's a lot of people whose job it is that they have to care. That's what they get paid to do. So, okay. All right, great. So let's talk a little bit about the November election. So as mentioned, we have 5.5 million voters. Everyone will get a vote by mail ballot. So make sure your registration is up to date and your address is up to date so we can get the ballot to you. We actually sent about 3 million vote by mail ballots out in the primary, but the law changed and now it requires us to send a ballot to everybody. So that'll be an additional 2.5 million ballots that we send out. If you do want to vote in person, we will be using social distancing at all our vote centers. We'll have 800 of them around LA County. The number one is going to be Galen Center. No, I'm just kidding. Will be, and you'll probably, if you do want to vote in person, I'm sure you'll use that, but there's a lot of other options to let people know about. We'll have a lookup tool on our website, and we'll be mailing out information so people know where to find those. There'll be a total of 11 days of voting, so 10 days of early voting. We'll have 75 locations open up on October 24th, but the Galen Center will open up on October 30th. But the entire period is actually 11 days. Most of them are 5-day locations, though. And then also you can return your vote by mail ballot to a drop box. We'll have about 400 of those around LA County. And you can mail it if you want, or you can take it to a drop box, or as mentioned earlier, you can drop it off in person. These are what our drop boxes look like. When you send back your ballot, make sure you place your ballot inside the return envelope, sign and seal the return envelope. We check the signature of every single vote by mail ballot that's returned to us. So we've heard a lot of talk these days about how you can't trust vote by mail because you don't know if it's safe and there's fraud and all of that. It's a very safe method, both from public health standpoint and also from an election integrity. The reason we know it's safe is because we do check the signature of every single ballot that's returned. So if your ballot was returned by someone that wasn't you, they're not going to be able to sign it, and it won't count if it's not your signature. Okay. All right. Also, you can, I mentioned this, you can return it at a vote center, or you can send it by mail, and we'll start sending them out on October 5th. If you want to track your ballot, you want to follow the progress of your ballot and get notified when we've received it, you can sign up for Where's My Ballot. It's called Ballot Tracks. It's a statewide program. You sign up through the Secretary of State's office and it'll notify you along the way. All right, trivia time. So which age group is the largest demographic, and which age group is the lowest, has the lowest turnout, should say has the lowest turnout? I'll give you a hint. It's the same group. We all know this, right? I think everyone is.
Generation Z.
I'm sorry?
Generation Z.
It's at the, I've lost track of what the different labels are. So 18 to 30-year-olds, is that Generation Z?
No, that's actually, that's part of them. That's
Okay.
actually Generation Z. I'm millennials.
So 18 to 30-year-olds, and as you skew younger in age, the numbers get even more dramatic. So I think it's not surprising that younger people are the lowest turnout. That's something we hear a lot, and I think it's why we do things like this, to encourage people to vote and let people know the importance of voting. But I think what people don't realize is it's actually the largest demographic in terms of age groups. And so imagine if we could increase the number of people from that age group who vote, what would the landscape look like in terms of who's elected and the issues that we care about and so forth. So it's good to encourage your friends. You probably have the biggest impact than any of us on getting people to vote, because people are going to listen to their friends or family members or so forth. So it's worth mentioning that. I think it's a good trivia question to just keep that in mind. Okay. So the 11-day and the 5-day voting period. So we have 75 locations roughly open on the 24th of October. And then they'll be open all the way through to Election Day, which is November 3rd. And then there's 5-day locations, which will be about another 725, which the Galen Center is one, and it opens on October 30th. And that gives us about our 800 total. They'll be geographically distributed around each supervisor district. High profile locations, I mentioned the Galen Center. Other places are Dodger Stadium, Staples Center, Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, Hammer Museum, a lot of different opportunities and places to vote. For the early voting period, that's everything up through November 2nd. It'll be 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And then on Election Day, the hours will be 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So it provides people opportunities depending on your schedule where you're able to vote. If you do vote in person, or if you're not and you want to just check this out, this is the most cutting edge voting system anywhere. And we are also really proud of this system. It's the first ever publicly owned voting system. So our department developed this. in a partnership with a number of design firms, or in partnership with a design firm and a number of stakeholders that are experts in usability, voting rights, things like that. So it's the most modern voting system you'll see in the country. Again, we're really proud of it. It's still a paper ballot. That's the one thing we always want to stress. It's not electronic voting, even though you see a touch screen. Basically use the touch screen to make your selections, and then it prints directly onto the paper. There's no internet connection, no Wi-Fi or anything like that. You just plug it into the wall, and anyone can use it. And this is what allows people anywhere in LA County to vote. So that's why even if you live in Long Beach, but you go to USC and you're going to be by the Galen Center and you want to vote at the Galen Center, your Long Beach ballot, you can go ahead and do that at any vote center in LA County. It'll bring up your ballot. It provides an independent and private voting experience. It's fully accessible. You can attach any accessibility device. If you have a sip and puff device, for example, you can plug that in and you can vote using your sip and puff device. Actually, during the testing phase, one of the really cool stories that came out from it was there was a person who was a quadriplegic and really used this long kind of dowel or long rod they navigated with their foot. They were able to plug that rod into the ballot marking device, and they voted their entire ballot privately and independently using their foot. And it was a pretty amazing experience to see, and I think it really embodies this voting experience. The idea is that the person who needs the highest level of assistance, if they can use it, then all of us can use it. So it actually is the first voting system where someone who's blind can vote without having to tell anyone their selections and without having to give anyone their ballot, because you vote your ballot and then it goes back into the voting device, and then that's how you cast it. So we're really proud of this system. People have had a really good experience. I don't know if anyone used it in the primary, but people seem pretty pleased with it. It's got a headset if people need to listen to their ballot. So if you need it translated into a language other than English, we serve voters in multiple languages. You can have that translation, or if you have a disability that might require use of a headset, that's available as well. And then you can also adjust the text size and the contrast and so forth. All right, there's also a new service called Interactive Sample Ballot. This was pretty popular. We also rolled this out in the primary. It's almost like an electronic version of your sample ballot booklet. So you make all your selections on your mobile device or your home computer. You generate something called a poll pass. And then when you show up to vote in person, you scan it and it pre-populates your ballot. You can still make you can still make changes. You're not beholden to whatever you selected on the poll pass. And you don't even have to use it. You could decide to discard it and just mark them by hand if you want, but it really saves people time. I actually used this to vote. We had a vote center here at the office. So after I was done late one night at like 10 p.m., I went down and I voted, and I scanned my poll pass, and I was in and out of voting in like 2 minutes. So it was really quick. It's pretty easy to use. And so this is all through our website. You don't need to download an app or anything like that. Okay. All right, last couple slides, and then we can do some questions. If you do vote in person, we will be taking in mind social distancing and public health. So everyone will need to wear a mask. If you forgot your mask because you ran out of the house, you were so excited to vote, you just ran out without your mask, we'll have masks there to give you. And all election workers will have masks and gloves. We will social distance the devices, so everything will be 6 feet apart, and the line will make sure we'll space everyone 6 feet apart. And after you use a ballot marking device, they're going to wipe it down and sanitize it after each use. If you do want gloves to use, they'll have gloves available upon request. If you don't want to wear a mask, we are not going to turn you away. You have to go back to your car and sit in your car, and you can use something called curbside voting. I'm not trying to encourage people to do that. It's more that, curbside voting is normally used in the past for individuals who might have a disability and they're unable to come inside. But this time we're using it for people because we don't want to deprive anyone of their right to vote, but we don't want to allow people inside without masks. So it's our way to handle that. So if you don't want to use that service, then put on a mask, you'll be able to vote, and then you can take it off when you leave. All right. Great. So what is the safest method in terms of public health for voting? I kind of mentioned it earlier.
Jeff, if I could interject while people are thinking.
Sure, absolutely.
Question 4, I did a little research, and it looks like Gen Z covers 5 to 24, and Jason had an answer of millennials age 22 to 38. So I think they both cover that age range of 18.
Oh, okay.
So we got 2 winners there. So
There we go. I like that.
yeah.
I know we're all competitive here on this. All right, so anyone thoughts on the safest method in terms of public health for voting? Contactless, what would contactless voting be? So
Mail-in.
voting by mail would be the safest public health. I hesitated on putting this in here because I didn't want to make people think that, I didn't want to discourage someone from using the Galen Center because I think it's a great site, but it is the best method. But you could walk it into the Galen Center and drop it off in the ballot box there as well if you want to stop in and say hi to everybody. But it is the safest method. Vote by mail drop boxes, as mentioned, they'll be all over LA County. You can send it back by mail. But we are promoting this as the safest method just during times of pandemic. And in-person voting is not just for people who just prefer in-person voting. Due to some of the assistance you can get in terms of voters with disabilities or language needs, sometimes really the best method for them is that in-person experience. But for most voters, this will be the safest method and the best method. All right, so just a quick mention about the timeline. So today, sample ballot booklets are going out. October 5th, we will be mailing out vote by mail ballots. And then on October 19th is the deadline to register to vote. October 24th, vote centers will open. That's the first 75. And then on the 30th is the 5-day vote centers, and that includes the Galen Center. The election is November 3rd, and then that's it. So that's the timeline for the election. If you miss the registration deadline and you need to register to vote, you can go in person to any vote center, and this is another reason why in person is good to have. And you can do something called conditional voter registration. Sometimes people know it as same-day registration. And even up to election day, you can register and vote same day. It's a conditional ballot, so we set it aside and we check your registration before counting that ballot. But it's one thing that we want to mention that people know is available. So there's no excuse, no matter what the situation is, we've got you covered. Anyone who says they can't vote because of XYZ, we have everyone covered, and so everyone should be able to vote if they want to vote. Okay, just stay engaged. We're on all the social media platforms, the major ones. We should put out a lot of information in this day and age of fake news and misinformation and disinformation and all of those other things. People trust what comes from our office more than they trust anywhere else in terms of elections. Best way to counter misinformation is to share the correct information. So feel free to follow us. Also, if you need to contact me, there's my email. Go ahead and feel free to pass that around. Happy to connect with anyone. And we have one more question. Last question here. All right, so this is, I guess I wanted to end on kind of more of a discussion type question. So why is it important to vote in all elections and be informed, not just for presidential and congressional contests, for all levels of government and ballot initiatives? So kind of talked about that in the beginning. I thought I would do a little bit of a callback and circle back around. So maybe what's one main reason why all elections are important? What did we talk about at the beginning when we first started? We threw out suggestions about issues. What impacts us on a daily basis?
I think just that, just staying involved in the issues that do impact us on a daily basis and making sure that we don't make it just about, again, the presidential election, but at the local and state level, knowing, what decisions are being made on our behalf.
Yeah.
And that means something to us.
Everything that impacts us, from our education to our jobs and careers, family, community life, our lives. are decided a lot of times at the state and local levels. You know, there's so much talk about, you know, COVID. Much of those decisions, while the federal government, of course, has a huge responsibility in that, there's also decisions made at the state level and local level in terms of, you know, what businesses can be open. A lot of it is probably falling on the state more, at least in California, but businesses that can be open, schools, whether or not they can be open, that's all decided at the state level. So all these things probably in 2020, it's a, you know, I think it's the realization that these things impact our lives much more than people maybe have realized. So it's good just to stay involved and make sure, you know, are the people who are making these decisions, are those the people you want to make those decisions? So that's it. Happy to do questions at this time. Great. So I'll stop sharing this. There we go.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was very informative. Does anyone have any questions that they have for Jeff?
I told you I'm very thorough.
I do have one question just in terms of, you know, the ballots, as you said, the sample ballots go out today. And then just in terms of vote by mail, do we know any more about the impact of the Postal Service, if that will affect vote, you know, that system?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of talk about the Postal Service. Some of it is not always the best information. So we're not anticipating any issues with the Postal Service. We frequently, election officials throughout the state meet regularly with the Postal Service, at least the regional offices. One thing people don't realize is they give high priority to election mail from the election officials' offices. They will not forward things like vote by mail ballots, which is why we stress changing your address. Unlike other mail, you might get forwarded. So those get returned to our office. In terms of returning the ballot, California did change its law. It used to be that as long as it was postmarked by election day, we had up to 3 days to receive your ballot. So for this year, California changed its law and we now have 17 days to receive your ballot. So even if there's a little bit of a slowdown, the state legislators already took care of that to make sure that the counties had enough time. So has to be postmarked by election day. You can't vote a week after the election and send it in. So it has to be postmarked by election day, but as long as you send it off and it is received by within 17 days, then that's okay. But if you don't trust the Postal Service or you prefer not to use them, there is the drop boxes. We always like to stress, and you know, we want to make sure people feel comfortable when they return their ballot. So, oh, and then there's no stamp necessary either. So you just return it postage paid.
Great.
All right.
Any other questions? I do have one more then too.
Sure, absolutely.
What the differences in terms of deadlines for registration is differs from one state to the next. Where can people go and find that information for their state?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the election laws vary state by state. The best place is their Secretary of State's website. There's a lot of organizations too working on voter registration. So I'm sure a number of organizations in those states that are operating, but go to your Secretary of State's website or your county election official. Either one will have information about voter registration. One thing I like to stress, and I think it applies to vote by mail, it also applies to voter registration. We always stress just taking care of everything early. Don't wait, take care of it early. If you know who you want to vote for and you're set with your vote, fill out your vote by mail ballot, send it off, show up on October 30th and vote. If you want to do in person at the Galen Center or anywhere else, you know, take care of everything early. We had a lot of lines in the primary. I don't think that's not news to everybody. There was lots of discussion around that. Part of it is that a lot of people waited to election day. Under our vote center model, we really depend on people coming out early. So we're trying to encourage people that if you're ready to cast your ballot, come out early, come out on the weekend or the days prior and cast your ballot. That's the best thing. That way you can avoid lines on election day as well. So.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, Effie.
Jeff, thank you for that very thorough presentation. I had a question about just the context for voting. You know, we often talk about the folks who have given their lives to secure those votes, from the inception of our country to the women's suffrage movement to civil rights. And, you know, you did a great job at outlining some of the ways in which voting can impact our day-to-day lives. As we think about trying to encourage people to register and get out to vote, are you aware of any specific messaging or strategies that could get particularly the student demographic motivated to come out to vote? What are the things that can be done, or is there a specific kind of targeted messaging that works better than others?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're more about just administering the election and promoting it. So we try to give the same message to everybody. You know, we might tailor some of our targeted communications to different demographics, but just kind of in the civic engagement context, I think, you know, we always hear, oh, you know, your one vote can make a difference. We've heard that for the longest time. I feel that's become a bit of a hollow message, that people are kind of onto you, like, oh yeah, you know, look at these totals. And while it's true, there are elections that are decided by a handful of votes. I think the way to feel truly empowered is you're not voting, you're not just one person, you're part of a movement for whatever issue that is. You're part of a collective. If you believe, let's just use the minimum wage. There's a lot of people out there who believe in raising the minimum wage, and they likely support candidates that believe in raising the minimum wage. So I think thinking about it in that context of, like, we need to vote for this person because we're in favor of raising the minimum wage, or we're not in favor of raising the minimum wage, whatever your issues are. And I think identifying with people who share those common values and share those common interests, I think it shifts the conversation away from candidates and it moves towards issues, because issues is what really motivates, especially the younger demographic. That's what the research shows. And I think that's the case for anyone. I'm motivated by issues probably more than individuals. And that's probably not something that's that out of the ordinary for most people. So I think that kind of approach is a little bit of a new way of thinking about it, rather than the slogan of, oh, you know, your vote can make the difference, because most of the time, maybe not, but we vote as a collective. We're a collective society. We're a community. We vote as a community, and we want to find like-minded people that share our interests. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
I think it's worthy of a follow-up conversation with what are the things that maybe some folks who are registering to vote for the first time or didn't vote in the past, and why they're voting in a separate venue.
Yeah, you know, you know, a lot of times people, you know, one common message I hear a lot is like, you know, I'm voting because there's people in my family who can't vote, or there's friends I know who can't vote, and so I'm going to be their voice. And I think that's a pretty powerful message, because it's true, especially for people. There's many families who, you know, they've immigrated to the country, and you know, the first generation is now able to vote, and they're able to be that voice. So you know, some of those messages are really good to highlight, because I find that very powerful, and you know. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
So I just wanted, if there's no more questions, if there aren't any more questions, thank you all for being here.